Hi there, it's Paul Palmer here again with another edition of Rebuilding the Collection, or Junkin' and Jivin' in Lockdown. In this series of videos, I'm working out which of my earliest jazz albums, which I collected in the form of cassette tapes, should be thrown away and which should be kept for eternity in digital form. I've recruited friend and former colleague Eric Blackman to help me with this onerous task, and he joins me now from down the line in Houston, Texas. Hi, Eric.
Morning, Paul. It's morning here. Sorry, it's afternoon there, or late afternoon, early evening, isn't it?
Yes. A reminder that we're discussing my cassette collection by album title in alphabetical order, which allows us to discuss different albums from the same artist in different episodes. We did a couple of L's last time, The Magnificent A Love Supreme, along with Spyro Gyra's Love and Other Obsessions. So now we'll press on with the M's, and let's just have a round of applause for the list. And here it is, Flora Purim and Airto, The Magicians. That came out in 1986 on Crossover Records. Now, Eric Dolphy, The Memorial Album, sometimes known as Conversations, actually, came out in 1963 on VJ, or if it's FM, if it's Conversations, it came out on FM. Michael Brecker, 1987 on Impulse. And finally, Miles Davis, My Funny Valentine, 1965, Columbia. Well, Eric, let's chew over that list for a bit, and what do you think about it?
I like the list. The list is fantastic. I found amongst my collection some supporting material for a couple of the things, Miles Davis and Michael Brecker, quite easily. And I love the list.
Oh, that's great. At this point, I sometimes ask, is there something beginning with M that I should have had in my collection at the time? And I could already think of another Miles Davis. And you mentioned it in a previous session, Milestones.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was listening to last night, actually, and it was awesome. Awesome. It really was. Fantastic. So let's kick it off then, I think, by having a look at Flora Purim and Airto, The Magicians, 1986 on Crossover. I think you didn't really know this before, Eric, but what was your overall impressions? We've just had a flavour of it, haven't we? What's your overall impressions of it?
Well, it certainly sounds ethnically, musically Brazilian of the 1980s. There's another singer whose name I've recalled now, Tanya Maria. Tanya Maria is a singer and pianist and composer. And this album that we're discussing and Tanya Maria sound, if I want to flirt with getting in a little bit of trouble for saying so, they sound of a type, particularly from the 1980s to my listening.
Yeah, there is a kind of smooth commercial sheen. Sorry, I cut you off there.
Right. It's post Jobim and the 1960s Stan Getz collaborations with Jobim and all of that stuff. And now it's 20 years later, and we're in this commercial era. And dare I say, yet again, in one of our shows, the backdrop to this is the Thatcher Reagan period.
Yeah, I guess so, actually. I never really thought about it. But yeah, a very sort of commercial, the need to make money, and music is very much a product. So you've got kind of disco-y sort of, I don't know how you describe that, Bird of Paradise, which sort of is a kind of funky disco number. There's some smooth, overproduced, sort of happy-go-lucky, breezy music.
Yeah.
But there is some. Having said that, there's some Brazilian, authenticity on this album. Garimpo, for example. A lot of percussive input, and Esquinas is a slow ballad sang in Portuguese by Flora herself.
Right.
I don't know if you're aware of the work of Flora Purim, and she's very sort of associated with Chick Corea, and possibly even Airto himself as well. So Return to Forever, she's on that in
Yeah,
that
yeah. I was
group,
familiar with that before. Sure.
and so there's a lot of she's got a lot of kudos in jazz. And what else can you say about it? There's a very sort of refreshing sort of love ballad at the very last track, Love Reborn.
It was very blue, and I recall so well standing in front of you.
I think we've really got to think about what we're going to do with this. What do you think? Are you tempted, or are you thinking, I'm going to lock this in the cupboard or melt it down?
I think it takes the influences of elsewhere in the Americas and gives us a healthy dose and taste for that as we get closer to closing out the jazz century, the 20th century. I think it's worth keeping. It takes, I think, as I said earlier, to my way of thinking and hearing and experience, the Jobim, Stan Getz type of collaborations, and evolves them, even though it kind of settles in I hate to say it, but a kind of like easy listening arena. But that's where it was. I mean, the only way to have gotten to the 1990s was through the 1980s.
I think this has got some merit to it, and I think you're right. I'm going to hang on to it. It's
Very
going
good.
into the collection.
Great.
So now I think we ought to discuss the Eric Dolphy. And I must own up to a bit of a mistake, really, because this album, which is, I had it down as the Memorial album. But what is called the Memorial album is actually a different album. This is the Eric Dolphy Memorial album, sometimes known as Conversations. It's just got exactly the same tracks on it. But it's got Memorial album. Okay, strictly speaking, it should have been done with the E's, but I have to say I've overlooked it. Besides, we have a prime minister. Or, this is done a few weeks in arrears, so we may have had a prime minister who makes the rules and then likes to break them. So I think I could take my cue from him. So yes, we're going to call this the Memorial album, the other Memorial album. Okay. In it, Eric Dolphy, very shall we say, quirky, but also very established and experimental multi-instrumentalist. He takes on two large groups, and then in this album he actually pairs it right down to a duet and then plays solo. Well, what do you think of this album? We had another little flavour of this earlier.
I love this album. For me, it's going in spectacular directions. Dolphy is, I don't hear him as at this point in time as such a revolutionary and such an eccentric, but someone that's coming right out of the jazz traditions, um, and telling a story certainly at times with an awful lot more notes and harmonics and so on and so forth. But boy, he takes it to an extreme direction that to me seems very, very valid. And there aren't a lot of imitators because it's a hard thing to imitate.
Absolutely right. Let's look at some of the tracks then. We have got Jitterbug Waltz, which is a waltz, as you might. That's where he's playing the flute in this big band. It's written by Fats Waller, apparently. There we go. I love the ensembles, the two ensemble pieces. The next one is Music Matador with the it was said to have a Caribbean flavor, but I hear it's more like Spanish Mexican flavor, and it's just a lovely sort of cultural blend, really. Then we have two solos, or rather, there's a solo. Alone Together is a duet between bassist Richard Davis and Dolphy himself plays on bass clarinet. And the other one, Love Me, I guess, is just him on alto saxophone, just playing. So there's a lot to listen to, and I think the more you listen to it, the more you kind of get into it and you understand what Eric Dolphy is all about.
Yeah, I think it's a treasure because no one is in the Eric Dolphy school of playing, really, save for the fact that I think earlier before we started taping, I brought up a 1970 American album called Murder at Kent State University. And it's about 1970 and what happened in Ohio in the United States. But on it is the great bass player Ron Carter and the great alto saxophone and flute player James Spaulding. And James Spaulding is playing a little bit in the Dolphy direction. It's very abstract. And the only thing behind James Spaulding, whether he's playing alto or flute, is Ron Carter. And he's going in some abstract directions and overblowing some overtones and melodic lines. So that's 1970. And to me, now that you and I are speaking of Eric Dolphy, it sounds that James Spaulding is very much influenced. So 6 years after the death of Eric Dolphy in 1964, he's very much influenced by Eric Dolphy.
Okay, well, I'm hanging on to that one. We must move to the next, I fear. So Michael Brecker. This is one half of the Brecker brothers, is it? I don't know how many Brecker brothers there were. There were just two, weren't there? Yeah. This is his first solo album, having been a member of the Brecker brothers band for in and out of 20 years. And when did Steps come along? And Steps Ahead, were they later? I'm feeling they might have been even later than that. But
my memory, they were perhaps the 80s. Also, to my memory, yeah.
Well, I have to admit, I totally forgotten this album, but it really is a great album. And Brecker's playing is a revelation, isn't it? It really is wonderful to listen to. Let's have a look at some of the things on this album, because the heads are quite quirky, but I mean, it's still fairly straight ahead jazz, I would say. Most of the material is by him. Let's just have a look at some of the other contributors. Don Grolnick, Nothing Personal. Mike Stern, Choices. They're kind of collaborating on Original Ray, so a lot of these songs or tunes are collaborations as well. What do you make of Michael Brecker's playing and this album in particular?
Yeah, I love his playing. His playing used to mess me up big time because it sounded like that. It struck me that you had to be able to do what Michael Brecker could do. It's just overwhelmingly powerful as far as its emotional and musical impact and his technical abilities on the saxophone. I really first paid attention to him on an earlier album by almost a decade. This Australian pianist, Mike Knock, who was in New York for the time period, and the great Al Foster on drums, George Mraz bass. And there are a couple of tunes here that are coming out of the straight ahead school. And I love this particular phase of Brecker's playing. It's very earthy on top of it, very gutsy. So when he finally comes up with his own album and he's able to steer the direction of the music and do his own compositions his own way and so on and so forth, everyone went out and got the album.
Very of its time still, this album. It's got what's this say? Extended. I can't read my own writing. Lots of drumming, electric synth sounds, and it's got that kind of 80s feel. Then you have art choices. Nothing Personal. For me, that's a really up-tempo number. That sounds, when he solos on that, it sounds his most Coltrane-esque to me. He's got that sort of very busy playing, very fast patterned playing. But it's fantastic. It's just that presence and that personality which stamps itself all over this album.
Brecker took the post-Coltrane thing, perhaps the furthest. You can see this on YouTube. They're a wonderful video of a Coltrane tune, maybe some impressions, with Dave Liebman, Michael Brecker, I think Joshua Redman, and Joe Lovano. 3 or 4 tenors playing Coltrane's impressions. And you hear their styles and you hear what's happened with the post-Coltrane school of players. And certainly it further confirms that there isn't a saxophone player alive who's not, perhaps, a bold statement, influenced by, and in many cases, very, very influenced by Coltrane and Rollins, the last great schools of playing post Charlie Parker, coming out in the 1950s.
Yeah, well, there we are. There's no question, but it's got to remain in the collection. And I think we've got one more to cover, and it's the great Miles Davis again. And we are looking at My Funny Valentine. You can tell me about this. It's one half of 2 gigs, is it? Or no, 1 gig split into 2, and this is one of the. Oh, I don't know what.
Right. So, My Funny Valentine.
Yeah.
The album. 1964, raising money for voter registration in the United States, in particular in Mississippi and Louisiana. I've driven through Mississippi quickly, driven about in Louisiana, because of course, New Orleans. And in any event, it's the 1960s and a turbulent time. And I think what I mentioned previous was that there had been some sort of contentious argument before they went out on stage at Philharmonic Hall for one of these nights in the making of My Funny Valentine and 4 and More. And the tension gave them a certain focus and a certain energy. And in any event, this is in between great quintets, so it's said, because I think 1 year after, or less than a year after, George Coleman is replaced eventually by Wayne Shorter, which is the next great quintet period of Miles Davis. But here we have standards, and they're certainly bringing a new freshness to it in my hearing of this album. It's not just what had been done for a 20-year period before this.
Well, yeah, most of the albums songs are the Great American Songbook, with the exception of All Blues, but that's now an absolute classic. So it's the heart of all that's popular and really the essence of culture, American essentially culture, yeah. And let's just have a look. My Funny Valentine. I thought they're quite long, aren't they? Those particular tracks. I think they fill a whole side of the album. And then
They're
you have
stretching out. They're stretching out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm looking at the vinyl actually, and the tracks are kind of stretched out. On one side are 3 tunes, Stella, All Blues, I Thought About You. But with Funny Valentine and All of You, they're quite stretched out.
Yeah.
I think that's fantastic because it was a live concert, and you hear the applause, the spontaneous applause.
Yeah. So standout tracks. I mean, let's face it, it's not entirely perfect. You can hear the odd fluff note, as you would expect, and you can hear the odd squeak from the Coleman. I think, yeah, go on.
That's part of the sounds of jazz. We're allowed to do that. I joke around with my students all the time. I mean, if you do this, we're holding the saxophone and we're doing this. And I tell them that, if you do that in the symphony orchestra, they ask you to stand up and move a little bit away from the rest of the musicians, and they shoot you, and then they get the next person in. But in jazz, it's part of the sounds of jazz. This is fantastic. Jazz is forever honoring, dignifying the imperfect nature.
Yes. Stand up. I think for me, George Coleman is the overall performer with which I can relate the most. He's in soccer over here we have the man of the match. I think to me, George Coleman is the man of the gig on this occasion. I think the others are really good, but I mean, he's just got that sound, and it's just so silky smooth, and it just does everything. And track wise, I like Stella.
So George Coleman, I would agree, is on fire during these albums, Funny Valentine and 4 and More. He's smooth, he's classy, he's absorbed all the tenor saxophone styles of the past and created his own. And he's negotiating the changes with an assuredness and a sophistication harmonically, tonally.
Great. Well, we're keeping them all. We're keeping everything because we're hoarding. We're hoarding for the 20th century, for the 21st century. And speaking of the 21st century, you'll have noticed there is nothing here from the 21st century or even the 1990s, late 1990s. That's because, about cassette tapes, they weren't around very much after that as a medium for collecting music. So we need to be very grateful for anyone who's viewing our videos to maybe give us a heads up on what albums, beginning in this case with M, that we've missed from the 21st century. You can contact us by leaving some comments for this video at the bottom of the videos within YouTube, or perhaps drop us a line on Twitter. Use the hashtag collection build, all one word, or if you want to DM me on Twitter, you can do that at collection build, and you can email me, that is collectionbuild@gmail.com. And I think that's probably it. Yes, it's been a great discussion, I think, and I thank Eric very much for joining us today and for your input, Eric. Thanks.
Thank you.
This has been Rebuilding the Collection. I'm Paul Palmer.